There's a photograph that most people have never really stopped to look at. November 1963, the steps of the United States Capitol. A young widow of 34, veiled in black, stands alone with her two small children beside a flag-draped casket. Heads of state, generals, cameras, the entire world watching. But she looks like she is somewhere else entirely. Like the noise of the world has gone quiet and the only thing left is that coffin. That woman was Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and the man inside that casket was the only reason, by her own admission, that she had ever truly felt alive. Most people know the surface version of her, the pillbox hats, the flawless French, the Queen of Camelot. What very few know is what came after Dallas, what it truly cost her to survive, and what it meant to keep going once the fairy tale had been blown apart in front of the entire planet. This is that story. Welcome to Gilded Shadows, the sanctuary for the forgotten stories of the great upper-class dynasties. Here, we lift the veil on the tragic lives of first ladies, billionaire heiresses, aristocrats, and magnates who shaped history from the shadows. Behind the palaces, the luxury, and the perfect appearances lie devouring grief, invisible sacrifices, and silent downfalls. Long, cinematic narratives without sensationalism, for those who want to understand the true cost of power and fortune. Subscribe for more incredible stories from the world of the elite. Jacqueline Lee Bouvier was born in Southampton, New York, on July 28, 1929, into a world of old money that was already cracking at the edges. Her father, John Vernou Bouvier III, known as Black Jack, was a dashing but reckless stockbroker whose gambling, drinking, and endless affairs eventually destroyed the marriage. Her mother, Janet Lee, was elegant, ambitious, and determined to keep up appearances. When Jackie was just 7, the divorce came, ugly and public in the way only old money scandals can be. The little girl who had once ridden ponies in East Hampton now found herself split between two households, learning early that wealth could buy beautiful things, but could not buy safety or love that stayed. She grew up quiet, bookish, and fiercely private. At Miss Porter's school, she was known as the girl who drew horses in the margins of her notebooks and wrote poetry that already carried a melancholy far beyond her years. She studied at Vassar, spent a year in Paris at the Sorbonne, perfecting her French and her sense of style, then finished at George Washington University. By 22, she was working as the inquiring camera girl for the Washington Times-Herald, asking witty questions of politicians and celebrities while hiding behind the lens. It was there in 1951 that she met the man who would change everything. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was 34, a freshman senator from Massachusetts, handsome, ambitious, and already marked for greatness. Their courtship was swift, intense, and complicated. Jackie later said she fell in love with his mind first. He fell in love with her composure, the way she could walk into any room and make it feel smaller. They married on September 12, 1953, in a lavish ceremony in Newport, Rhode Island, that the press called the wedding of the decade. Jackie was 24. Jack was 36. Almost immediately, the fairy tale showed its cracks. Jackie suffered a miscarriage in 1955, then another heartbreaking loss in 1956 when their daughter Arabella was stillborn. The pain was private, but Jack's political rise was very public. When he announced his run for the presidency in 1960, Jackie was pregnant again. She campaigned anyway, appearing in her elegant suits and speaking flawless French and Spanish to immigrant crowds. On November 8, 1960, John F. Kennedy became the 35th President of the United States. Jackie was 29 and about to become the youngest First Lady in modern history. She walked into the White House with a very clear sense of what she was there to do. She wanted to restore beauty and history to a building she found shabby and soulless. She personally oversaw the redecoration of every public room, raised private funds so no taxpayer money was used, and turned the White House into a showcase of American culture and art. She hosted legendary evenings with poets, musicians, and scientists. She charmed the world during the state visit to France in 1961, where President de Gaulle reportedly whispered to Jack, "I am jealous of you." The French newspapers declared, "Jacqueline Kennedy has conquered Paris." At home, the press called her Camelot, borrowing the name from the Broadway musical, and the image stuck, a young, glamorous couple leading a new American Renaissance. But behind the velvet curtains, the reality was more fragile. Jackie had another miscarriage, then gave birth to John Jr. by cesarean in 1960. She suffered severe postpartum depression. Jack's health problems, his chronic back pain, and the constant rumors of affairs weighed on her. Yet she never let the public see the cracks. She protected her children with an iron will, refusing to let them become political props. She traveled, she restored, she smiled for the cameras, and she endured. Then came the day that ended everything. November 22, 1963, Dallas, Texas. Jackie wore a bright pink Chanel suit that morning because Jack had asked her to. As the motorcade moved through Dealey Plaza, the first shot rang out. Jackie later described hearing what sounded like a motorcycle backfire. Then the second shot. She turned to see her husband's head explode. Blood and brain matter sprayed across her suit, her face, her stockings. In that moment, the entire world watched a young wife become a widow in real time. She climbed onto the trunk of the limousine to reach the Secret Service agent, screaming, "They've killed my husband." At Parkland Hospital, she refused to change her blood-stained clothes. "I want them to see what they did to Jack," she said. Hours later, still in that pink suit, she stood beside Lyndon Johnson as he was sworn in aboard Air Force One. She flew back to Washington with her husband's body in a casket in the cargo hold. The days that followed were a blur of ritual and raw grief. She planned every detail of the state funeral with military precision. The riderless horse, the eternal flame, the procession down Pennsylvania Avenue. She walked behind the casket in her veil, holding Caroline's hand, while the world wept. At the Capitol, she stood for hours as hundreds of thousands filed past. When it was over, she returned to the White House for the last time, now a private citizen at 34 with 2 small children and a grief so large it threatened to swallow her whole. The years immediately after Dallas were the darkest. Jackie retreated into a fog of depression, alcohol, and sleeping pills. She smoked constantly. She raged at the Secret Service, at the press, at the Kennedy family. She told friends she felt like a living wound. There were quiet affairs with married men, desperate attempts to feel something other than emptiness. She moved the family to New York, to a penthouse on Fifth Avenue, trying to give Caroline and John a normal life. But the Kennedy curse followed. In 1968, Bobby Kennedy, Jack's brother and her closest confidant, was assassinated in Los Angeles while running for president. Jackie was devastated. She told a friend, "If they're killing Kennedys, then my children are targets." That fear drove her next decision, the one that shocked the world. On October 20, 1968, Jacqueline Kennedy married Aristotle Onassis, the Greek shipping billionaire who was 23 years her senior. The wedding on his private island of Scorpios was called the marriage of the century and the betrayal of the century at the same time. Americans felt she had sold out the memory of Camelot for money and security. Jackie didn't care. She later explained it simply. She needed to protect her children, and Onassis could give them a fortress the United States could not. The marriage was stormy. Onassis was possessive, flamboyant, unfaithful. Jackie spent long periods alone on the island or in New York, reading, editing, and trying to rebuild a life that felt like her own. In 1975, Onassis died of complications from myasthenia gravis. Jackie was a widow again, this time at 45, and now one of the richest women in the world. Instead of disappearing into luxury, she did something remarkable. She went to work. In 1975, she became an editor at Viking Press, then moved to Doubleday. She edited books on art, history, and culture with the same meticulous eye she had once used on the White House. She protected her children's privacy with ferocious determination. When John Jr. wanted to fly, she worried but let him. When Caroline married, she was there quietly. She fought paparazzi in court and won. She restored her apartment, hosted small, elegant dinners, and traveled the world not as a celebrity but as a private citizen who happened to be one of the most famous women alive. She never remarried. She never sought the spotlight again. In the 1980s and 1990s, she became a quiet patron of the arts, a fierce defender of historic preservation, and a grandmother who doted on her grandchildren. She rode horses in Virginia, walked the streets of New York in sunglasses and scarves, and lived with a dignity that made even her critics admire her. But beneath the surface, the old wounds never fully healed. She carried the memory of Dallas every single day. Friends said she still woke up some nights hearing the shots. In 1993, she was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She faced it with the same quiet courage she had shown the world 30 years earlier. She continued working, continued seeing friends, continued walking in Central Park. On May 19, 1994, at the age of 64, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis died in her New York apartment with her children and her longtime companion Morris Tempelsman at her side. Her funeral was private, exactly as she wanted. She was buried beside John F. Kennedy at Arlington National Cemetery, under the eternal flame she had lit 3 decades earlier. The simple marker reads only Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. She left behind a legacy that is still impossible to define completely. She was the woman who turned the White House into a living museum, who charmed the world in French, who stood in blood-stained pink and refused to change. She was the widow who buried Camelot and then quietly rebuilt her own empire in silence. She was the mother who protected her children from the very fame that had destroyed their father. She was the editor, the preservationist, the private citizen who understood that true power sometimes means choosing not to be seen. In the end, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis did not want to be a legend. She wanted to be Jack's wife, Caroline's mother, John's mother. And in her own quiet, ferocious way, she remained exactly that until the day she died. The woman in that photograph on the Capitol steps, veiled in black, holding her children's hands while the world watched, knew exactly who she was. She had always known. It just cost her everything to stay that way. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to Gilded Shadows so you never miss out on more hidden stories of the upper class. Old money, power, loss, legacy.